So the argument, Chris, was that when the FDA approved mifepristone 23 years ago, it did not undertake a rigorous review. And it's true, there was an abbreviated process here, but that was because the FDA was relying on over 20 years of data that had been conducted in Europe after the European Union had approved mifepristone. So it wasn't a tabula rasa. They weren't operating on a blank slate. There was plenty of evidence showing the safety of mifepristone. So the argument here is that the FDA hasn't done its due diligence. Well, that's not quite true. And indeed, if that was the case, it seems like the best time to bring that argument would have been 23 years ago as opposed to now. But here we are, and this ruling stays the FDA's approval of mifepristone, which means that in 7 days, it will not be available in the nation in order to be sold. But again, as you say, there is this conflicting ruling from the Washington District Court, which again presents a real conflict for the FDA and perhaps an invitation to the Supreme Court.
As if this were a rational decision premised on rational findings about the lack of safety of the drug. Look at the language of this decision, which is we talk about doctors as abortionists. The medication starves the unborn human until death. It resurrects the notion that what's really going on is women terribly regret the decision to have an abortion. And in a universe in which Federalist Society judges are concerned that, about administrative agencies not being, not taking care, not being careful about the science, if there is an administrative agency that is careful about the science, it's the FDA. This is not a contrivance. They have hearings, there are findings, and in this case, there's a 23-year battle. So I think that this is a complete pretext by a judge who wished to deal with unborn humans rather than medicine.
Right. I mean, we're talking about, a petri dish of tissue is what we're talking about at 10 weeks. Okay, this is so bizarre, and it's just so predictable as a result of having the Federalist Society, having Opus Dei, having, uber right-wing, a sect of Catholicism govern all of us from on high, and going back to 1600 or 1873 to find something that they can point to in law that's been overturned, okay? It's been overturned. Griswold is, the 60s, 1965, right? It's been overturned, but something that they can hang their hat on. Okay, so you know what? Here are the steps. Number one, the DOJ has got to go to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and ask them to freeze this ruling, ask them to halt this ruling pending the actual oral argument in the appeals court. And if it is to happen, it will happen in the Fifth Circuit. Although the Washington, there's another judge, Judge Rice in Washington State, who said about 2 hours after Kaczmarek made his ruling, Judge Rice weighed in with his ruling and said, do not disturb the status quo in these United States, okay? I'm a federal court judge, I'm a district court federal judge, and I'm saying do not disturb. So you have two courts disagreeing with each other, okay? And that creates an opportunity to go to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court in this case is the one that we know undid the privacy rights that we were relying on for the last 50 years in Dobbs. Although I will say, I don't think that Kavanaugh and I don't think that Alito wanted to go as far as Amy did, go as far as Gorsuch did, Clarence did, okay? And so if you have Alito and Kavanaugh siding with Ketanji Brown Jackson and Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, you would have a 5-4 ruling destroying this Kaczmarek ruling. So there's that. But in the meantime, they have to stop and halt the implementation of this, because if they don't, then on Friday of this week, no more mifepristone for you. The other thing is you have to do what Jay Inslee is doing in Washington State. You know what he did ahead of this decision, because everybody knew it was coming? He stockpiled for the people of the state of Washington 3 years worth of mifepristone. He's got 30,000 mifepristone pills, okay, that he purchased ahead of this because prior planning prevents poor performance, especially when you're pregnant. And so he's got a stockpile of this, and that's another good thing to do. And if you're a woman and you're of, procreation age, like you're still making eggs. Somebody said to me over the weekend, I went to visit my mother, and in her building, some guy, obviously, elderly, said, "Are you the Easter Bunny?" And I said, "No." And he said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because I have no eggs." I don't think he got it. I don't think he did. But if you have eggs, you get it, right? So if you have eggs, I would say go get a prescription, get it filled for, a few rounds of mifepristone if you feel like that's something you'll need going forward. The third thing that needs to happen is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has to reapprove mifepristone and deal with whatever Kazmarek is saying they didn't deal with. Like he's saying that women who have had abortions are psychologically damaged, which is just garbage. But women are psychologically damaged once they, choose the mifepristone, or once they choose birth control. They're just psychologically damaged, and the FDA never looked at the psychological effects. Well, there is an extraordinary amount of information and data, hard scientific data, that says that that's not true. Women, we don't sit there and regret our decisions, okay? We don't want some teenage boy making our future decisions for us, okay? And so we're very cool about what we're doing, okay? We think about it. It's not like we just, we're like a teenage boy, okay? And we just flee. No. Anyway, the FDA has to reapprove. And the fourth thing that needs to happen is we have to figure out what is the statute of limitations on an FDA approval and objecting to it, because I heard it's 6 years. Well, it's been 23 years, so the statute of limitations has run. And if the statute of limitations is a thing when it comes to Donald Trump's issues, right, then the statute of limitation is a thing here too. And then, of course, the FDA. The FDA is a federally recognized, in fact, it's the gold standard in drug approvals around the world. The FDA has enforcement discretion. The FDA is able to say, we're not enforcing this decision, and they should do that. They should ignore this ruling. But in order to not have to be on the wrong side of the law and order crowd, which are, they're just front-running phonies, that. The Fifth Circuit should stay this pending appeal. Because, if they get their way with the FDA, right, if they actually say there is no statute of limitations, if they say that the FDA doesn't have enforcement discretion, if they say that the FDA didn't do due diligence on this particular drug, which is garbage, right, and 23 years of use also shows that it's garbage because, like I said, it's 99% effective. 0.4% of the people who take it have side effects. 0.4%. And the death rate, the mortality rate associated with mifepristone is 0.0001. So we know that, right? But if they get their way and they do something to say that the FDA is illegitimate, or the FDA isn't the gold standard, or the FDA doesn't do due diligence, whatever, you know what's next, right? It's not just going to be mifepristone. It's going to be all contraception, all of it. It's also going to have a lot to do with HIV drugs. It's going to have to do with PrEP. It's going to have to do with, Biktarvy. It's going to have to do with a lot of HIV virus drugs. It's going to have a lot to do with puberty blockers. Because you know what mifepristone actually blocks? It blocks a hormone. It blocks progesterone. That's what it does. And that's what puberty blockers do. So, and, honestly, the birth control pill is made of the same stuff. So this is going to be an unbelievable battle for so many people in this country, all in service of making you feel unwelcome, making this country inhospitable for women, for non-whites, for non-Christians, for gays, for transgender children, I mean, children are already not free to roam around the country. The public can't go out in public anymore because it's not safe out in public anymore. You can't go to a bank. You can't go to the grocery store. You can't go to school. You can't go to the synagogue. You can't go to church. Can't be on a military base. Can't be in military housing. Can't be in a fast food restaurant. I mean, can't be on the street. Can't be protesting, because, if you're protesting, someone can kill you. And stand your ground. Don't have time to listen to the live show? Want to hear more on your schedule? Go to randyrhodes.com and buy a stinking podcast.